Now that we've talked about the different layers of skin, we're going to talk about different skin appendages. And we're going to start with the sweat glands or the sudoriferous glands. Um, these appendages are all found in the dermis, so that's where we're going to find the sweat glands. Sweat glands are producing perspiration or sweat. And so the function of perspiration is to excrete waste. There's a chemical that we find in perspiration called urea. It's the same chemical that we also find in urine. So it's a chemical that our body needs to get rid of. We mainly get rid of it in our urine, but we also can get rid of that same chemical in our sweat. We prevent overheating through perspiration by our body putting that liquid on the surface of our skin. As it evaporates, it cools the body temperature. And it's also an autonomic response to pain and stress. So sometimes those emotional aspects of pain and stress can cause a physical response. And sometimes that means you start to sweat. When it has nothing to do with removing waste, it has nothing to do with overheating. Perspiration is over 99% pure water. Now, less than 1% is all the rest of the stuff that makes up perspiration. So, that metabolic waste, that urea we talked about, there's some lactic acid called lactate in there, and then salt and trace minerals can also be found in there. Perspiration itself is an odorless substance. When we have that odor that is associated with sweat or perspiration, it's not the solution, the liquid itself, but it's actually from bacterial waste on our skin surface. So we have bacteria all over our body, and most of that is normal bacteria that's supposed to be there. When we sweat, the bacteria on our body actually start to feed off of it. And when they start feeding off of our sweat, they produce their own wastes. And that is what causes the odor associated with sweat and perspiration. This is just letting you know that the body odors that we have actually are all from different sorts of chemicals being produced. And so this is just some extra information that specific smells come from specific chemicals that are in our bodies. We do have two types of unique or modified sweat glands. So these develop from the same tissue that all the other sweat glands do, but then they go through some modifications. So one are the ceruminiferous or the ceruminous glands. The ceruminous glands. This produces earwax or cerumen. Functions are to protect our skin. The skin inside your ear is very delicate, so it's helping to protect that. It cleans because things can get trapped in that cerumen, and it protects from bacteria, fungus, and water. So you can see there's lots of different types of earwax, lots of different compositions of earwax. So that's one modified sweat gland. Earwax can be a different color. So this is just an interesting chart that shows normal earwax coloration and possible abnormal earwax coloration. The other modified sweat gland are mammary glands. And instead of producing perspiration, mammary glands produce breast milk to feed infants. Both males and females have the tissue for mammary glands. Lactation depends on the levels of the hormone prolactin. So the mammary glands won't produce any breast milk unless it won't lactate unless there's high enough levels of prolactin. So technically, men could lactate if their prolactin levels were high enough. there you can see what the mammary glands actually look like. The next appendage are sebaceous glands or oil glands. We have these glands everywhere except the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. These secrete sebum, which is the oil of your skin. Most sebaceous glands are connected to a hair follicle. So not only is it lubricating and softening the skin, but it's also helping to lubricate and soften your hair. It slows water loss from the body, so it's going to help prevent evaporation. And there are some fatty acids within the sebum that are able to kill bacteria. And sebaceous glands are under hormonal control. Now, this is one reason why the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet can get very dry, because we have no sebum that's actually being distributed on those parts of the body. So, like we just said, that sebaceous glands are under hormonal control. Androgens are present in both male or both sexes, but are much higher levels in men. Sebaceous glands are affected most dramatically by androgens. And so with females, after puberty, hormones are constantly fluctuating, and it can cause fluctuations in sebum production. And so that's why females might notice that at certain points within a month, her skin might have different oily levels or might be drier in certain parts. Males after puberty, hormone levels are constant, and so they are always having constant sebum production. So men don't notice kind of cyclical breakouts in their skin as much as females would. Acne is when hair follicles become plugged with sebum and dead skin cells. And remember, if the sebaceous glands are hormonally controlled, this is why, as a teen or young adult, acne seems to be more of a problem. Acne can be treated with creams, cleansers, or even antibiotics. And there's 5 main types of acne. Blackheads are when the hair follicle is plugged with sebum and dead skin cells, but is open. And when it's open, the oxygen in the air actually causes the sebum to turn black. So it's not that it's filled with dirt, it's just a chemical reaction of the exposed sebum. On the other hand, a whitehead is pretty much the same thing, except the very top is covered. And so since the top is covered, the oxygen in the air is not touching the sebum, and so it doesn't go through that chemical reaction to turn it black. A papule is when the follicle is plugged with sebum and skin cells, and then it starts to become inflamed. So it starts to swell up. A pustule is an infected papule. So not only is it inflamed, but now it's starting to form pus. And so then you're going to notice that white center of pus filling inside. The pus is actually dead white blood cells that have gone to try to fight the infection. And then nodules are severe acne when you have large, painful breakouts. And this is kind of like a pustule, but it's more severe and it goes further down into the skin. So here are just some images of the different kinds of acne. Another skin appendage is hair. Fancier name for hair is pilus or pili. Functions of hair is for protection, sensory perception, and temperature regulation. Distributed over most skin surfaces except soles and palms, similarly to sebaceous glands, since sebaceous glands and hair follicles are linked together. Hair grows from follicles. The follicles we find in the dermis, however, they're actually epidermal cells. It's like the epidermis was pushed down into the dermis and it's growing a hair from that pocket. Hair also has keratin, but it's a different form of keratin called hard keratin. It still is for waterproofing and it gives it strength, um, but it makes it a little harder than skin. Like you can feel there's definitely a difference between the composition of your skin and your hair. And what makes it hard keratin is that it contains more sulfur. And then pigmentation is from melanocytes, just like skin. It's just melanocytes are within the hair rather than the skin, and it's inherited separately. So you don't have the same skin color as you do hair color because you're actually inheriting those through separate genes. So these are all the associated hair structures. There's the shaft, the follicle, the bulb where the growth is actually taking place. Erector pillae is a muscle that's attached to the hair that will pull on the hair and give you goosebumps when you are cold, trying to trap heat at the skin surface. Sensory nerve endings, blood vessels, sebaceous glands, all associated with hair. Hair shaft anatomy. So if we look at an individual hair and if we do a cross section through it, we'll see a cuticle. It's the outer layer, and the cells that make up the cuticle are kind of scale-like. Then we're going to have a layer called the cortex. This is where we're going to find most of the hard keratin, and it's also where we're going to find the melanin that gives it color. And then the very center is the medulla. In some hair, it's not even there. So some hairs only have a cuticle and a cortex. Not every hair has a medulla. Here's some extra information about hair. So it's not just that we have hair, but the follicle shape determines our hair texture. Whether the follicle is round or if it's oval or if it's kind of a U shape, that's going to depend on whether we have straight, curly, or wavy hair. And follicle size will determine hair thickness. So the bigger the follicle, the thicker the hair is going to be. So if you take all of this together, it's going to give you your unique hair texture. There's two main types of hair. Vellus hair is pale, fine body hair. This is what we have, what babies have. Children have this. Adult females have this over most of their body. And this hair does not have a medulla. Terminal hair is coarse, long hair. So this is what we have in our scalp, our eyebrows, our eyelashes, our axillary and anogenital regions are all covered in terminal hair, and the bodies of adult males. And that's because of androgens. Males tend to have more androgens, that's that hormone, and so they develop more terminal hair over more parts of their body. Females usually have less androgens, and so their arms usually form the vellus hair because of that. Hair goes through a 4-stage growth cycle, whether it is on your scalp or your eyebrows, it's all going through this same cycle. The first is called the anagen phase, and this is the active growing phase. This can be anywhere between 2 and 7 years, and this will determine the length of the hair because the longer growing phase means that the hair is going to be longer. Catagen is a transition phase. It usually lasts about 10 days, and this is when the follicle shrinks. And so that means that there's not going to be any growth during this time. Telogen is a resting phase. And on average, this will last about 3 months. And during this point, the follicle becomes active, but it's growing a new hair. So the old hair is just kind of sitting there, and the follicle starts to grow a new hair. And exogen is when the new hair is taking over. And so that old hair that was just sitting there is shed. So, some interesting facts: vellus follicles are no different than terminal follicles. The lack of medulla causes the hair to be weaker and not grow as long. Terminal hair, like eyebrows and eyelashes, follow the same cycle. The only difference is that the anagen phase is much shorter. Rather than 2 to 7 years, it's only going to be a couple of months long. The average scalp contains approximately 150,000 hairs, and the average person loses 80 to 100 hairs a day. All of our hair is at different stages in the growth cycle. So that's why we don't like lose all of our hair at once and then it all starts to regrow. And as we age, less melanin is produced. And so eventually that's why we start to go gray. The length of the anagen stage decreases. So that growth stage shortens and the hair becomes weaker and thinner over time. Alopecia is the name for hair loss. This is usually reversible if we're talking about external factors. So if you have insufficient nutrition, you're not eating healthy enough, that can actually affect your hair growth. Stress, different medications, and chemicals all can cause your hair to stop growing or actually cause you to lose hair. But if you end up turning those things around, then it should be reversible and your hair should start to regrow and become healthy again. Now, if it's a biological factor, then that hair loss is probably going to be permanent. Most of the time, it's genetically caused or at least genetically influenced. So you might notice a premature transition from the growing to the resting phase. And so it doesn't grow as long or as much as it used to. The hair follicle could actually start to decrease in size, and that is often due to testosterone derivative called DHT. When this happens and when the follicle shrinks, it will produce vellus hair or possibly no hair at all. And so that's when we see individuals who are starting to like have patchy areas on their scalp. And then you see this like wispy hair growing there instead of like normal terminal hair. There's different stages of alopecia. So you can see here the different types of balding patterns that do exist. Not everyone balds exactly the same way. Another appendage that we have in our skin are our nails. And nails and hair are very similar. They protect your fingertip and surrounding tissues. They enhance your fingertip sensitivity because if something is on your nail, you're going to feel that cross force and that'll help you feel other objects. And you can also use it as a tool. Similar to hair, they're actually epidermal cells that have been pushed into the dermis and are growing out of the dermis. And these also have hard keratin rather than the soft keratin. No pigmentation, so there's no melanin in your nails. Your nails are translucent. The reason they may have a pink appearance to them is because since they're translucent, you are able to see the capillaries that are in the dermis through the translucent nail itself.